I was standing in my driveway at 6 in the morning when I first realized that my perfectly reasonable snow storage solution was about to become the most unreasonable problem of my winter. The pile of snow I'd cleared from my driveway sat neatly in the corner of my property, exactly where any sane person in Boulder, Colorado would put it, when a white Lexus pulled up, and a woman with an asymmetrical blonde bob stepped out holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of fake politeness that immediately puts you on edge. "I'm Deborah Whitmore, president of the Mountain View Estates Homeowners Association. Are you aware that your snow storage area is in direct violation of our community guidelines?" I blinked at her, my shovel still in hand, steam rising from my coffee mug on the porch railing. "My what? Your snow pile." She gestured dramatically at the mound of snow I'd spent the last hour carefully moving to the edge of my property. Section 7.4 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that snow removal must not create unsightly accumulations visible from the street. I looked at the snow pile. It was maybe 3 feet high, pushed against my fence in the back corner of my front yard. Every single house on this street had similar piles. Some were bigger, some were literally in the middle of their front yards. "You're kidding," I said. "I assure you, Mr. Reynolds, I am not." She pulled out her phone and took several photos of my snow pile. "You have 72 hours to remedy this situation or face fines beginning at $100 per day." That's when I knew this winter was going to be different. My name is Yates Reynolds, and I'd moved to Boulder 6 months earlier for a job at a tech startup. The house was perfect, the neighborhood seemed quiet, and the HOA fees were reasonable. Nobody mentioned that Deborah Whitmore treated the Homeowners Association like her personal fiefdom. I watched her drive away in her Lexus, then pulled out my own phone. If she wanted to play the documentation game, I could document too. I took photos of every single snow pile on our street. Mrs. Henderson, 3 houses down, had snow piled 4 feet high right next to her mailbox. The Johnsons across the street had created what could only be described as a snow mountain in their side yard, clearly visible from the road. But here's what really caught my attention as I walked the neighborhood that morning. Deborah's own house, a sprawling ranch-style place at the end of our cul-de-sac, had a massive snow pile that extended halfway across her front lawn. I took at least 20 photos from different angles, making sure to capture the street sign in several shots for verification. The next day, I received a formal violation notice in my mailbox. It was printed on official HOA letterhead and outlined my violation with bureaucratic precision. The letter referenced specific sections of the community guidelines and included a timeline for compliance. It also mentioned that a hearing would be scheduled if I failed to comply within the designated time frame. I spent that evening reading through every single page of the HOA bylaws I'd signed when I bought the house. The documents were dense, written in that special kind of legal language designed to be simultaneously specific and vague. Section 7.4 did indeed mention snow accumulation, but the wording was open to interpretation. It said snow should not create excessive and unreasonable accumulations that detract from community aesthetics. That's when I started keeping a detailed log. I created a spreadsheet with dates, times, locations, and photos. Every morning before work and every evening when I got home, I walked the neighborhood. What I discovered was fascinating in the worst possible way. Deborah's interpretation of HOA rules appeared to be entirely selective. The violations I documented over the next week included residents with garbage cans left out past collection day, cars parked on lawns, holiday decorations still up from Christmas, even though it was now mid-February, overgrown hedges blocking sidewalks, and at least 6 properties with snow accumulations larger than mine. But the most interesting discovery came on day 4 of my documentation project. I was walking past the community mailboxes around 7 in the evening when I noticed something odd about the HOA's public bulletin board. The board was supposed to display meeting minutes, financial reports, and community announcements. According to the bylaws, financial information had to be updated quarterly and made available to all residents. The last financial report posted was from 8 months ago. I took photos of the board, noting the dates on all the posted documents. Then I went home and sent a formal email to the HOA board requesting copies of the current financial statements, meeting minutes from the last 6 months, and a detailed breakdown of how our HOA fees were being spent. Deborah's response came within an hour, which told me she was sitting at home monitoring her email like a hawk. "Mr. Reynolds, your request will be processed according to standard procedures. Please allow 14 business days for a response." The bylaws stated that financial information requests should be fulfilled within 7 business days. I highlighted that section, saved it, and added it to my growing file of documentation. My 72-hour deadline passed. On the 4th day, I found another notice on my door. This one informed me that I was being fined $100 per day until the violation was corrected. The notice was dated and signed by Deborah, with a secondary signature from another board member named Gerald Chen. I left the snow pile exactly where it was and requested a formal hearing with the HOA board. According to the bylaws, they had to schedule this hearing within 15 days of my request and provide me with an opportunity to present my case before any fines could be enforced. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday evening at the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that hosted everything from yoga classes to book clubs. I showed up 15 minutes early with a laptop, a folder full of printed photos, and a flash drive with backups of everything I'd collected. Deborah sat at the front of the room behind a folding table with 3 other board members: Gerald Chen, Martha Sullivan, and Tom Bradford. About a dozen other residents scattered throughout the metal folding chairs, apparently there to watch the show. "This hearing is called to order," Deborah announced, tapping a gavel she'd apparently purchased just for these occasions. "We're here to discuss the snow storage violation at 214 Ponderosa Lane, owned by Yates Reynolds. Mr. Reynolds, you've requested this hearing. Please present your case." I stood up and connected my laptop to the projector I'd noticed in the room. "Thank you for the opportunity. I'd like to start by showing some photos I've taken over the past 10 days. The first image appeared on the wall, my snow pile, neat and compact in the corner of my property. This is my alleged violation: a snow pile approximately 3 feet high, positioned on my property against my fence. Click. The next image showed Mrs. Henderson's massive snow pile. This is 208 Ponderosa Lane, snow pile approximately 4 feet high, positioned next to the mailbox. Click. 217 Ponderosa. Click. 196 Ponderosa. Click. 233 Ponderosa. I cycled through 15 different properties, each with snow accumulations equal to or larger than mine. The room had gone quiet except for the clicking of my mouse. "Now," I said, "I'd like to show you one more property." Click. Deborah's house filled the screen. Her massive snow pile sprawled across her front lawn in all its glory. I heard a few murmurs from the other residents. "This is 278 Ponderosa Lane," I said, "the home of Deborah Whitmore, HOA president. The snow accumulation here is substantially larger than mine and more visible from the street." Deborah's face had gone red. Mr. Reynolds, this hearing is about your violation, not about actually, I interrupted, pulling out my copy of the bylaws. Section 12.2 states that HOA board members are required to maintain properties in exemplary compliance with all community guidelines. I'm simply pointing out that selective enforcement of rules is, according to Section 12.7, grounds for a board member's removal. The room had gotten very quiet. I could see Tom Bradford and Martha Sullivan exchanging glances. Furthermore, I continued, pulling out another set of documents, I requested financial statements and meeting minutes 9 days ago. According to Section 3.4 of our bylaws, this information must be provided within 7 business days. I still haven't received anything. Gerald Chen cleared his throat. The financial statements are being compiled by our treasurer. According to your own bylaws, they should already be compiled and posted quarterly, I said. The last posted financial statement is 8 months old. I have photos of the community bulletin board showing this. I pulled up those images on the projector. The outdated financial report was clearly visible, with its date prominently displayed. I'm not trying to cause trouble, I said, which wasn't entirely true. I'm simply asking for consistent application of community rules. Either enforce the snow storage guidelines for everyone, including board members, or acknowledge that my accumulation is reasonable and within the spirit of the bylaws. Deborah stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is ridiculous. You're wasting everyone's time with these technicalities. I don't think requesting equal treatment under the rules is a technicality, I said calmly, and I don't think asking for the financial transparency we're entitled to is unreasonable. Tom Bradford raised his hand. I move that we table the violation against Mr. Reynolds pending a comprehensive review of all properties in the community for similar issues. I second that, Martha Sullivan said immediately. Deborah looked between them, her mouth opening and closing. You can't be serious. I think it's fair, Gerald said quietly. We should apply rules consistently. The vote was 3-1, with Deborah casting the only vote to continue with my fines. The meeting adjourned with Deborah storming out of the community center, and several residents coming up to thank me for speaking up. One of them, a man in his 60s with white hair and a flannel shirt, shook my hand firmly. I'm Phil Morrison. I've lived here 12 years, and Deborah has been pulling this selective enforcement garbage the whole time. About time someone called her on it. Has anyone tried to see the financial statements before? I asked. Phil's expression darkened. A couple of people have asked. She always has excuses. Honestly, I've wondered if something fishy is going on with the money, but nobody's ever pushed hard enough to find out. That conversation stayed with me as I drove home. The monthly HOA fees for Mountain View Estates were $250. With about 80 homes in the community, that meant the HOA was collecting $20,000 per month. Where was all that money going? The next morning, I sent another formal request for financial documentation, this time copying all 4 board members instead of just Deborah. I cited the specific bylaw sections and noted that my previous request had exceeded the required response time. Gerald Chen responded first. Yates, I'll look into this. We should have these documents available. Give me a few days. Deborah's response came an hour later. Mr. Reynolds, your harassment of the board is noted and will be addressed at our next meeting. Repeated frivolous requests for information constitute a violation of Section 8.9. I looked up Section 8.9. It dealt with resident conduct that unreasonably interferes with board operations. Requesting legally mandated financial information didn't seem to fit that description, but I could see where this was going. Over the next few days, I received 3 more violation notices. The first cited me for parking my car in my driveway at an angle that suggested long-term storage rather than regular use. My car was parked normally, just slightly offset because of the snow. The second notice claimed my mailbox was damaged and needed immediate repair. I inspected my mailbox thoroughly and found a tiny scratch on the post that could have been there when I moved in. The third notice stated that my window coverings were not uniform with community standards because I'd left my living room curtains partially open. Each notice came with potential fines and deadlines. It was obvious harassment, and it was equally obvious that Deborah had decided to make my life difficult until I backed down. Instead, I did the opposite. I started attending every single HOA meeting, which according to the bylaws were held monthly on the second Tuesday evening. I also began documenting every single violation I could find throughout the community, not just snow-related ones. The documentation became almost meditative. Each evening, I'd walk a different section of the neighborhood with my phone, photographing and cataloging everything that could potentially be considered an HOA violation based on our Byzantine rules. Garbage cans visible from the street, lawn ornaments that exceeded the size limitations, house numbers that weren't the approved font or size, cars parked on the street overnight, grass that was either too long or too short, depending on the season. What I found was that virtually every single property in Mountain View Estates, including those of all 4 board members, had multiple technical violations of the HOA guidelines if you interpreted the rules, as literally as Deborah was interpreting them against me. At the March HOA meeting, I brought printed copies of my documentation, organized by address and violation type. About 30 residents showed up, which was apparently a record turnout. Word had spread about my situation, and people were curious. "Before we begin with regular business," I said during the resident comment period, "I'd like to address the multiple violation notices I've received over the past few weeks. I believe these constitute targeted harassment in retaliation for my request for financial transparency." Deborah's lips pressed into a thin line. "Mr. Reynolds, if you would maintain your property according to community standards, I am maintaining my property," I said. "I'd like to submit evidence of comparable or worse violations throughout the community that have received no notices or fines." I began handing out my documentation packages to each board member and putting copies on the seats around the room. The room buzzed with conversation as people looked through the photos. I saw several residents finding pictures of their own homes and examining them with confusion or concern. "This is a witch hunt," Deborah said. "You're trying to deflect from your own violations by attacking your neighbors." "I'm not attacking anyone," I said. "I'm demonstrating that our community guidelines, as written, are nearly impossible to comply with perfectly. Everyone here has minor violations. The difference is that I'm the only one receiving notices and fines, the only one who happens to have requested financial information that the board is legally required to provide." Tom Bradford cleared his throat. "Deborah, have you prepared the financial statements Yates requested? It's been almost a month now." "I've been busy," Deborah snapped. "Managing this community is a full-time job, especially when dealing with problem residents." "Providing financial transparency isn't optional," Martha Sullivan said. "It's in the bylaws. We need to provide this information." "Fine," Deborah said. "I'll have something ready by next week." But next week came and went without any financial documents. Instead, I received another violation notice, this time claiming that I'd been observed conducting surveillance activities in the community, and that my photographing of neighbors' homes constituted harassment. That's when I decided to dig deeper. If Deborah was this resistant to providing financial information, there had to be a reason. I started with the county records, looking up tax information and property records for the community center and common areas. Then I filed a formal complaint with the county's HOA regulatory division, citing the board's failure to provide required financial documentation. The complaint triggered an official inquiry. 2 weeks later, I received a call from an investigator named Lisa Chen from the Colorado Division of Real Estate, which oversees HOA compliance. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm calling about your complaint regarding Mountain View Estates HOA. I've reviewed your documentation, and we're going to be conducting a formal audit of the association's finances. I wanted to give you a heads up that this might take several weeks, but we take these transparency issues seriously." "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate you looking into this." "One question," Lisa said. "You mentioned receiving multiple violation notices in what appeared to be retaliation. Do you still have all of those?" "Every single one," I said. "Documented, dated, and saved." "Good, keep everything. We may need it." The next HOA meeting was tense from the moment I walked in. Deborah's face was already red, and she wouldn't make eye contact with me. About 40 residents had shown up this time, the most I'd seen yet. "Before we begin," Deborah announced, "I want to address malicious complaints that have been filed with state regulatory agencies. These complaints are baseless and waste taxpayer resources on frivolous investigations." "The investigation isn't frivolous," I said. "The board has failed to provide legally required financial documentation for over 6 weeks now. That's a serious violation of Colorado HOA law." "You have no idea what you're talking about," Deborah said. "The finances of this HOA are perfectly in order." "Then it should be simple to provide the statements," Tom Bradford said. He'd been increasingly willing to push back against Deborah at recent meetings. "Deborah, I think we need to be straight with everyone here. Why haven't you provided the financial information?" "Because I don't answer to people who make demands," Deborah said. "This community has functioned perfectly well for years before Yates Reynolds moved in and started causing trouble." Phil Morrison stood up from the back of the room. "Actually, Deborah, several of us have had concerns about the finances for years. You've just bullied everyone into silence. I for one am glad someone finally pushed back." Several other residents murmured agreement. I could see Deborah's control of the room slipping. "I move that we conduct a vote of no confidence in the current board president," Phil said. "According to our bylaws, if a majority of residents present at a meeting vote in favor, the president position becomes vacant and must be filled by special election." "That's out of order," Deborah said quickly. "You can't just call for a vote. Section 11.3, Martha Sullivan said, reading from her own copy of the bylaws. "Any resident may propose a no-confidence vote at any regular meeting. The vote must be held immediately upon being seconded." "I second the motion," someone called out from the middle of the room. The vote wasn't even close. 37 residents voted in favor of removing Deborah as president. 3 voted against, including Deborah herself. Gerald Chen and Tom Bradford both abstained, but Martha Sullivan voted in favor. Deborah's face went through several shades of red and purple. "This is a farce. You people have no idea what you're doing. You'll run this community into the ground without proper leadership." "We'll take our chances," Phil said. Deborah gathered her papers and left the meeting. The remaining board members looked shell-shocked. Martha Sullivan eventually called for nominations for interim president until a special election could be held. Tom Bradford was nominated and elected unanimously. Tom's first act as interim president was to announce that he would personally work on compiling all requested financial documentation and would have it available within 1 week. His second act was to void all outstanding violation notices issued in the past 3 months, pending a comprehensive review of enforcement procedures. I left that meeting feeling cautiously optimistic, but I knew the story wasn't over. Deborah had been in control of the HOA finances for years, and her desperation to avoid transparency suggested something more serious than simple incompetence. True to his word, Tom Bradford had financial documents compiled within a week. What he found was concerning enough that he called an emergency meeting for all residents. I showed up to find the community center packed, with people standing along the walls. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this," Tom said. "After reviewing our financial records, I found significant discrepancies. Over the past 3 years, approximately $90,000 in HOA funds cannot be adequately accounted for." The room erupted in shocked conversation. $90,000 was a massive amount of money for a community our size. The records show various expenses for maintenance, landscaping, and community improvements, Tom continued. But many of these expenses don't have corresponding invoices or proof of work. Some vendors listed don't appear to exist when you search for them. And several large payments were made to a property management consulting company owned by Deborah's husband. "Did she steal from us?" someone shouted. "I can't make that determination," Tom said. "But I've already contacted the Division of Real Estate with our findings, and they're expanding their investigation. I've also suggested that we may need to file a police report for potential embezzlement." My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Lisa Chen, the investigator I'd spoken with earlier. "We need to schedule a time to discuss what you've documented. Can you come to our office tomorrow?" I replied, confirming my availability. This was getting bigger than I'd anticipated when I first started documenting snow piles and HOA violations. The next day, I drove to the Division of Real Estate offices in Denver with everything I'd collected: photos, violation notices, emails, copies of bylaws, and my detailed timeline of events. Lisa Chen met me in a small conference room with another investigator, a man named Robert Torres. "Mr. Reynolds, thank you for coming in," Lisa said. "We've been reviewing the financial records provided by Tom Bradford, and your documentation of selective enforcement is actually very helpful for our case." "How so?" I asked. "It establishes a pattern of behavior," Robert explained. "When someone embezzles from an HOA, they often engage in other abuses of power. Your documentation shows that Miss Whitmore used her position to harass and retaliate against anyone who questioned her authority. That helps us establish intent and consciousness of guilt." We spent 2 hours going through everything. They were particularly interested in the timeline of violation notices I'd received immediately after requesting financial information. "This is clear retaliation," Lisa said, "and it's illegal under Colorado HOA law. Even if we can't prove embezzlement beyond a reasonable doubt, this pattern of harassment and refusal to provide financial transparency constitutes serious violations that could result in fines and removal." "What about the missing money?" I asked. "That's where it gets complicated," Robert said. "We've identified approximately $90,000 in questionable expenses, but some of it might be poor record keeping rather than outright theft. We're working with a forensic accountant to trace where the money actually went." The payments to her husband's consulting company are particularly concerning because they appear to be for services that were never rendered. "What happens now?" I asked. "We continue investigating," Lisa said. We'll be interviewing other board members and residents. We'll also be recommending that the HOA file a police report with Boulder PD for possible embezzlement. This could take months to fully resolve, but I wanted you to know that your complaint has led to uncovering serious issues. I drove home feeling a mix of vindication and exhaustion. All I'd wanted was to be left alone about my snow pile. Now I was apparently a key witness in an embezzlement investigation. The next few weeks were surreal. News spread through the community like wildfire. Deborah stopped showing up to HOA meetings entirely. Her house went up for sale within a month, though I noticed it stayed on the market with no buyers. Apparently, being under investigation for embezzling from your neighbors isn't great for property values. The police investigation moved slowly, as these things do. I gave a statement to a detective from the Boulder PD Economic Crimes Unit. Other residents did the same. The forensic accounting revealed that over the course of 5 years, Deborah had siphoned off nearly $150,000 through fake vendors, inflated expenses, and payments to her husband's consulting company for work that was never performed. In May, 3 months after my first confrontation over the snow pile, Deborah Whitmore was arrested and charged with theft, embezzlement, and fraud. The charges were serious enough that the district attorney held a press conference, using the case as an example of HOA board accountability issues. I was at work when I saw the news alert on my phone. There was a photo of Deborah being led into the Boulder County Justice Center in handcuffs. Her husband, Richard Whitmore, was charged as an accomplice for his role in the fake consulting fees. The community was a mess of emotions. Some people felt vindicated. Others felt embarrassed that they'd followed Deborah's lead for so many years. A few still defended her, insisting there must be some misunderstanding, though their numbers dwindled as more evidence became public. Phil Morrison was elected as the new permanent HOA president in a special election. His first priority was implementing new financial controls. Monthly financial reports posted online, quarterly audits by an independent accountant, and a requirement that all expenses over $500 be approved by a vote of the full board rather than the president alone. The case against Deborah took nearly a year to wind through the legal system. I had to testify at her trial about the pattern of harassment and retaliation I'd experienced. The prosecutor used my documentation to establish that Deborah had abused her position to silence anyone who questioned her actions. In the end, Deborah was convicted on multiple counts of theft and embezzlement. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in prison, with the possibility of early release after serving 2 years. She was also ordered to repay the full amount stolen plus interest and penalties, which meant she and her husband had to sell their house and liquidate most of their assets. Richard Whitmore accepted a plea deal, testifying against his wife in exchange for a reduced sentence of 18 months and probation. The consulting company he'd created to receive the fraudulent payments was dissolved. The HOA managed to recover about 60% of the stolen money through the restitution order, insurance claims, and the sale of the Whitmore's property. It wasn't everything, but it was something. Phil Morrison used the recovered funds to finally complete several common area improvement projects that Deborah had claimed were done, but had actually never been started, including resurfacing the community center parking lot and replacing outdated playground equipment. Throughout all of this, the snow continued to fall in Boulder as it does every winter. I kept my snow pile in the corner of my property, neat and tidy, and nobody said a word about it. In fact, several neighbors started organizing community snow removal days. where we'd all help each other clear driveways and pile snow in designated areas that made sense, rather than worrying about arbitrary rules. The new HOA board revised the community guidelines, removing vague language about unsightly accumulations and replacing it with reasonable, specific standards that everyone could understand and follow. They also added strong protections against selective enforcement and retaliation. I became something of an accidental hero in the community, though I never set out to be one. People would stop me during walks to thank me for speaking up or to share their own stories about dealing with Deborah over the years. Apparently, I wasn't the first person she'd targeted, just the first one stubborn enough to push back with documentation and legal complaints. One evening in late November, almost a full year after the initial snow pile confrontation, Phil Morrison knocked on my door. He had a bottle of decent whiskey and a tired smile. "Thought you might want to celebrate," he said. "The final restitution payment came through today, and the new financial system is working perfectly. We're actually ahead of budget for the year." We sat on my porch, watching the first snow of the new season begin to fall. My driveway would need clearing in the morning, and I already knew exactly where I'd put the snow. "You know what the funny thing is?" I said. "All of this started because I wanted to be left alone. I didn't move to Colorado to become an HOA crusader." Phil laughed. "That's usually how it goes. The people who end up making a difference are the ones who just wanted someone to stop being unreasonable." He paused. "You could run for the board, you know. We've got 2 open positions." I shook my head. "Thanks, but no. I did my time dealing with HOA drama. I'm happy to attend meetings and stay informed, but I'll leave the actual governing to people who enjoy that kind of thing." "Fair enough," Phil said. "But if you ever change your mind, the offer stands." After Phil left, I sat on the porch for a while longer, watching the snow accumulate. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful in that way that only happens when snow muffles all sound. Lights glowed in windows up and down the street. Someone was building a snowman in their front yard, something that technically violated the old guidelines, but that nobody would ever complain about now. I thought about how strange the past year had been. How a simple snow pile had revealed corruption that had been hiding in plain sight for years. How standing up for basic fairness had led to uncovering fraud and embezzlement. How a community that had been quietly suffering under poor leadership had found its voice again. The thing is, HOAs aren't inherently bad. They're supposed to maintain property values, manage common areas, and create a sense of community. But like any organization, they're only as good as the people running them. Give someone unchecked power and some will abuse it. Add in a lack of transparency and a culture of silence, and you create the perfect conditions for corruption. What I learned is that documentation matters, rules matter, transparency matters. And sometimes, the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to back down when someone abuses their authority, even if it seems easier to just move your snow pile and move on with your life. The snow fell harder now. Big, fluffy flakes that promised several inches by morning. I'd need to get up early to clear the driveway before work. And I'd pile that snow in the corner of my property where it belonged, where it made sense to put it, and where nobody would ever threaten me with fines for doing so again. Inside my house, my phone buzzed with an email. It was from the HOA listserv, now managed by a rotation of board members instead of just Deborah. The email announced the annual holiday party at the community center, potluck style, everyone welcome. There would be hot chocolate and cookies, and Santa would visit at 7 for any kids who wanted photos. I marked it on my calendar. A year ago, I probably wouldn't have attended. I'd been new to the community, didn't know many people, and was still settling in. Now, after everything that had happened, I felt genuinely part of this neighborhood. Not just because of the drama and the investigation, but because the community had come together. We'd faced a problem, dealt with it, and come out stronger on the other side. That's not how these stories usually go in HOA situations. Usually the conflicts drag on for years. People sell their houses and move away. Lawsuits pile up. Communities fracture into factions. We'd been lucky in a way. The problem had been serious enough to force action, but the community had enough good people willing to step up and fix things. The next morning, I woke to 6 inches of fresh snow. I bundled up, grabbed my shovel, and headed outside. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the snow pink and gold. Up and down the street, other early risers were already out clearing their driveways. We waved to each other, called out greetings, compared notes on how much snow had fallen. I cleared my driveway in long, steady strokes, the physical work warming me despite the cold. When I was done, I carefully piled the snow in my designated corner spot, right where it had been that first morning when Deborah Whitmore had threatened me with fines and set this whole chain of events in motion. My neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, was outside clearing her own driveway. She paused when she saw me and called out, "Hey Yates, thanks again for everything you did last year. My daughter is thinking about buying a condo, and I told her to make sure she reviews the HOA finances before she commits. Never would have thought to do that before all this happened." "Good advice," I called back. "Financial transparency should be standard, not something you have to fight for." "Amen to that," she said, and went back to her shoveling. I took a photo of my completed snow pile, neat and tidy in its corner. Then I opened my phone and looked back at the photos from a year ago. Same spot, same purpose, entirely different context. Last year, this snow pile represented a threat, a battle line, the beginning of a conflict I hadn't asked for but couldn't avoid. This year, it was just a pile of snow. Nothing more, nothing less. That's how I knew we'd really moved past everything. When a snow pile could just be a snow pile again. The days grew shorter as December arrived, and with them came more snow. Bolder winters are serious business, and the constant cycle of snowfall and clearing becomes a routine part of life. But now, the routine felt comfortable rather than stressful. The HOA functioned smoothly under Phil's leadership. Financial reports appeared like clockwork in our email inboxes. Common areas were maintained. Problems were addressed promptly and fairly. We'd learned an important lesson as a community about accountability and the importance of questioning authority when something doesn't seem right. The new board had even created an anonymous suggestion box, both physical and digital, so residents could raise concerns without fear of retaliation. In late December, I received a Christmas card from Tom Bradford, who'd moved out of state for work in October. Inside, he'd written a note thanking me for having the courage to push back against Deborah's abuse of power. "A lot of us saw what was happening," he wrote, "but you were the one who actually did something about it. That matters more than you know." I added the card to my collection on the mantle, next to cards from Phil, Martha, and several other neighbors. It was a tangible reminder that standing up for what's right, even in small ways, can have ripples you never anticipate. The holiday party at the community center was packed. It seemed like almost every household had sent at least one representative. Kids ran around hyped up on sugar cookies and hot chocolate. Adults clustered in groups, chatting about everything from work to schools to the latest Netflix shows. The HOA board had set up a table with copies of the year's financial statements, just to prove they had nothing to hide. A few people actually stopped to look through them, which would have been unthinkable a year ago. Phil Morrison found me by the refreshment table. "You doing okay?" I know this whole thing was a lot to deal with. "I'm good," I said and meant it. It was stressful while it was happening, but I'm glad it worked out the way it did. "We're planning to do HOA training sessions next year," Phil said. "Bringing in experts to teach board members about their legal obligations, financial management, all that stuff. I'm hoping it prevents us from ever ending up in a situation like this again." "That's a great idea," I said. "Knowledge is power, as they say." "Indeed," Phil agreed. He paused, then added, "You know, I've been thinking a lot about how close we came to this getting much worse. If you hadn't pushed back, if you just moved your snow and kept quiet, Deborah could have continued stealing for years. She'd gotten comfortable, arrogant even. Thought she was untouchable. That's usually when people get caught," I observed. "They get careless, true, but they still need someone willing to call them out." Phil raised his cup of hot chocolate in a mock toast. "So thank you, Yates Reynolds, for being stubborn enough to care about a snow pile." I laughed and clinked my own cup against his. "To snow piles," I said. "May they forever remain just piles of snow." As the party wound down and people bundled up to head back to their homes, I stood outside the community center for a moment, looking at the neighborhood. Streetlights illuminated the snow-covered streets. Christmas lights twinkled on houses. Somewhere in the distance, someone was singing carols. This was what an HOA was supposed to create: a community. Not a dictatorship where one person wielded power over everyone else. Not a system where asking reasonable questions got you harassed and fined. Just a group of people living near each other, working together to maintain their shared spaces, and treating each other with basic respect and fairness. It had taken a confrontation over snow storage to reveal that we'd lost that somewhere along the way. But we'd found it again, and that was worth celebrating. I walked home through the quiet streets, my boots crunching in the fresh snow. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new weather, new ordinary concerns of daily life, but the extraordinary drama was behind us. Deborah was in prison, paying for her crimes. The stolen money was being recovered. The HOA was functioning properly with transparency and accountability, and my snow pile sat peacefully in the corner of my property, bothering absolutely no one.